Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Only Land Fan Show. My name is Kendall Lejeune, and our guest today is Joe Roberts. Joe Roberts is a United States Marine Corps combat veteran and former attack helicopter pilot. He began flipping land while deployed on active duty, and his success allowed him to exit the Marine Corps and focus on land full time. In that process, he discovered that cold calling was an excellent way to get land leads. However, there were no cold calling companies designed for land investors. So he built one himself, and Landcaller was born. He lives in North Carolina with his wife and 6 kids on a farm where he still runs a 7-figure land flipping company and is the CEO of Landcaller. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Kendall. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so excited to have you on. I tell you what, land caller, we hear that more and more is making waves in the industry, and so super excited to get your take on cold calling. Before we do that, before we jump in, tell us, how did you get started in doing land deals?
Man, I actually started real estate when I was deployed in Afghanistan in 2018, and I really wanted to get a rental property. I just was spent my time when I wasn't out on missions or whatnot, just reading everything I could, and I bought my first rental property when I got back from that deployment. And so I did the single family home, small multifamily thing for a couple of years where I was buying, rehabbing, refinancing, repeating, renting them out. And it went well, but you start to deal with a lot of tenants and a lot of headaches, and a lot of renovation starts to really test your patience when you're dealing with 5 different contractors. And I was actually at the Bigger Pockets conference one year, and I met JT Olmsted. I think he's actually been on your show.
Yeah, yeah,
There, we
he's a
happened to
great guy.
sit down. He's a great guy. He's probably my favorite guy in the whole land community. He's awesome.
He's
And
awesome.
I have him to thank for getting me into land because I never heard of land. And I happened to sit down with lunch with him, and then I was just blown away. I was like, wait, there's a way better way to be involved in real estate than single family homes. And so I was already doing off market lead gen with letters and stuff like that. So it was a pretty easy transition over to land. I was still active duty, so it was early mornings, late nights, weekends thing for me. But that's how I made the transition, was through JT and talking with him at that conference.
Yeah, I love that. JT is an absolute rock star. And there are so many of us, myself included, that have come from the dark side of single family houses and found our way into land. So much
Yeah.
simpler, not always easier, but definitely a simpler business model. So, what was your very first land deal like?
Yeah, let's see. So my first land deal was cool, actually. I sent out some letters to a place in Western North Carolina. I was stationed at Camp Lejeune at the time, so I've been in North Carolina for about a decade. And I found this cool property with a stream running alongside it. And the interesting thing was that the tax record showed 7 acres, and the owners had nice road access, had some flat area, and then it went up on a pretty steep hillside. But if you could get up there, then there was gorgeous views. You had to cross the stream, and the tax record said 7 acres, and the owners were negotiating on a price breaker basis based on the 7 acres. But I was looking at it, I was like, this doesn't look like 7 acres. And I realized that it was actually 13 acres. And so it was just a mess up from a subdivide in the 1960s. And it had been mislabeled as 7 acres ever since. So, of course, I didn't tell the sellers that, but I went ahead and bought it. And for 32,000, I think is what I paid for it. And then I listed it for 70 on Facebook Marketplace. And it was a seller finance sale. I think I took 20 something down and financed the rest at 10%. And JT had just launched Your Land Loans. So I stuck it on there, and I've been getting payments on it ever since. And I was hooked. I was like, it can't be this easy all the time. And I was right. It was not that easy all the time, but it was a great first deal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. How long did it take you to stop doing houses, or do you still do houses?
No, so by the time I'd actually met JT at that conference, I was searching for my next thing. Things had just starting to get like COVID. It was 2020, I think, and COVID had just started to cause the market to start at spike. And so I had stopped buying houses, and so I went full throttle into land at that time. I got deployed again. So that deal actually happened while I was deployed with Marine Special Operations overseas. And so I had an assistant back in the States that was helping me run everything. But I will say that took about 4 or 5 months for me to get that deal and I was in the red pretty deep. So it definitely took some getting after. But once I made some tweaks to my letters, I was just mailing back then. I quickly got traction and went from there. And I ended up doing so that deal came about in June, May or June, and I ended up, I think, finishing out that first year with about 8 or 9 deals. So
Nice. So you got proof of concept, learned a
yeah.
lot in that very first deal. So fast forward to today, what's sort of your bread and butter types of deals in your current business?
Yeah, I'll still do the odd flip. I like a flip into a seller finance note if I can get a good chunk of my investment back with the down payment. But I'm really focused a lot more on large subdivides at the moment. So not doing as many deals, and the deals take a little bit longer, but the payoff is a lot higher in terms of ROI on my time and my capital. And yeah, I've got a few different subdivides going on. I only work in North Carolina. I've only ever worked in North Carolina. I just have kind of my favorite markets here and I just keep working them. So I've got a few different subdivide development deals going on around the state right now.
That's excellent. So, can you talk to us a little bit about how did you come into cold calling? Because it sounded like when you first started, you mentioned mail. So, how did the cold calling come about?
Yep, I had ramped up my mail as I prepared to get out of the Marine Corps, and I was doing about 12 to 15,000 letters a month. And but getting out of the Marine Corps for me was a big deal because I joined when I was 18 to a service academy. And then so that was 4 years there and then 11 years. So I've been in the military 15 years. So every 2 weeks for 15 years, I got a paycheck, rain or shine, right? Didn't matter. I had 5 kids at the time. So getting out and leaving all of that was a little scary. And it was right at that time where I'm sure you remember, Kendall, is like the returns I used to see on mail are just crazy. Like people don't even believe the numbers I tell them with what I was getting with mail back when I very first started. And it didn't even last that long for me, like a year or not even. And then I started to see my returns slipping in terms of the response rate I was getting on these mailers right as I was like preparing to leave the Marine Corps and this was going to be my family's like full-time income. So I was like, oh man, I have all my eggs in one basket here. If mail doesn't work or if I send a bad mailer with the time it takes to get land, like that can screw you 4 months down the road. So I just started casting around for, okay, this is going to be a real business. Obviously, I'm supporting my family. Let's diversify a little bit. What's another good way to get leads? I tried the texting thing, looked into it. I didn't love it. And I had done a bit of cold calling with single family homes, actually. At one of my properties, I had just literally called up the owner and I ended up getting it. And I was like, cold calling seems like a good fit for land because all these mailers I'm getting are like primarily older people. A lot of times I'm calling them back on landlines to discuss the deal or they're super tech adverse. So I was like, let's give it a try. And so I just tried it myself for a couple weeks. I landed a nice deal and had put another couple in the pipeline. I was like, okay, so this works. I had a couple VAs working for me that I had worked. Actually, one of them had worked as a cold caller for a house wholesaler. So I was like, all right, I'll just put them to work cold calling. Perfect. Which that also worked, but I realized it wasn't a very good use of my time because I was now a cold call center manager. And I realized that being really good at cold calling in terms of staying compliant and knowing a dialer system inside and out and screen like hiring and training and doing quality assurance on your people it was like a whole other job I took on instead of doing what I really liked, which was negotiating awesome deals. So I just moved her back to acquisitions. It was like, I'll outsource this. I emailed a friend of mine who I'm sure you've heard of, Seth Williams. I was like, hey, Seth, I was like, I want a cold call. Like somebody does this for land, right? Like who does it for land? Like I searched through all your podcasts. I couldn't find anything. He's, I don't know anybody that does it for land. Like here's some house people that do it. So I tried a couple of those and they just clearly didn't understand land. It was taking so much time, like trying to train the caller that they would give me, but then the caller would switch and they were asking ridiculous questions, even though I gave them scripts. And so I was like, forget this. I'm just going to start something because if I could use it, then I bet I could get at least a few other land investors. That was my initial thought. I was like, if I just get a few other people that could use this, then that will cover all my costs and I can get leads for free for my land business. But I didn't want to run the management of the day-to-day calling because that was the part that was sucking all my time. And that's how Land Caller was born. It was
Yeah, Joe,
a
you make a
long-winded answer.
really, no, that's fantastic because you made so many great points. The thing that stuck out the most to me in that was that when you started putting the boots on the ground to actually do these cold calls, you quickly realized, oh, I've just created a new company that is
Yeah.
a lead generation company. So now the strain on your business was not only to bring deals full cycle like land deals, but to find them, that's a whole other that's a whole other
Yeah.
animal, right? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what are some of the common misconceptions that you've seen that land investors have when it comes to starting up a cold calling department in their own business? So they say, listen, I've heard about cold calling. I think I want to do this. I'm just going to hire some VAs. I'm going to have them cold call. What are some of the most common misconceptions that you see for investors in that way?
Yeah, I know these because I went through all these misconceptions. I was like, hey, how hard can this be? Like, I'm mailing, I'm getting a list, I'll send out a letter, but mailing is cake as compared to cold calling if you want to see the same returns, right? Once you've tweaked your letter, like it's as simple as pulling a list and mailing a list. So, first, it starts with data, right? So, data, we get really into our data with mailing as we should to make sure that we're pulling data from sources that give us the most robust property records, most up to date records for our area. So that's the baseline. But then you've got the extra step with cold calling and texting is your skip tracing. And what I didn't realize when I started was not all skip tracing is created equal. In fact, most skip tracing is junk. Name most skip tracing companies out there, and it's actually all the same stuff. They all use this one company that they all white label and sell it. And it's not very good. And it's the same thing you're buying if you're buying it off Fiverr. So that was for step one is if I don't have good numbers, it doesn't really matter how many dials I make because I'm not actually connecting with the person who owns the land. So you've got two layers of data now that you've got to deal with as opposed to mailing with just one layer of data. And then another thing was then I've got this whole compliance thing and mailing. There's starting to be some laws around it. Georgia came out with their thing in a couple of states, but by and large, mailing is pretty safe to stay compliant. There's not a lot you have to do. It's not the case with digital marketing, particularly text and cold calling. And yeah, I have to say, like when I started cold call, I didn't know anything about do not call list. I didn't know anything about the TCPA, about litigation, about the insane amounts of litigation there is around cold calling and texting. So I'm lucky. I escaped without causing any damage before I learned my lesson, and I didn't have to learn it the hard way. I just learned it through a lot of research. But that's the other thing. It's like you can't just get on the phone and start calling, as you can. I guess it's a risk versus reward type thing, but you are taking a significant risk, and we may get to it later in the discussion. But the regulatory horizon for that is becoming more and more regulated by the year.
Yeah, that's definitely a hot topic. I know it's a hot topic in texting and cold calling and ringless voicemail is all of this, the litigation and what does that look like in the future. So I definitely do want to pick your brain in that area. But you mentioned about skip tracing, not all skip tracing being created equal. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that in terms of what makes good data and why is it that the majority of the companies are using this white label data source isn't maybe necessarily the best option? Hey, land fans! The brutal truth about land investing is even the best deals mean nothing if you can't get them funded. Enter Serious Land Capital, the Austin powerhouse revolutionizing land funding and operating nationally. Look, I turn down 9 out of 10 potential advertisers because I only partner with people I personally know and genuinely trust to serve our community. After spending time with Chris Duff in person and seeing how they operate, I can tell you, these folks are the real deal. Co-founder Chris Duff and his team bring institutional-grade expertise to our Wild West industry, with substantial capital reserves and a legal team that specializes in complex land deals. Whether you're looking to scale your land business or just getting started, Serious Land Capital has the resources you need. Ready to level up? Head to seriouslandnow.com to submit your deal, join their world-class land daily diligence sessions, or try their game-changing Land Pricer AI tool. That's seriouslandnow.com. where serious land investors get serious results.
Yeah, skip tracing is definitely a pay for what you get what you pay for industry, right? So it's used because it's cheap. It's repackaged white pages data essentially. Data, people, I don't personally I have the same number I've had since I've been in college, but Americans change their phone numbers and it increases every year the rate at which they change their phone number. So what was somebody's phone number 10 years ago is no longer their phone number now in most cases. That's a little bit different with landlines, but even those change frequently and more are going away. So the frequency with which data gets updated is super important to your skip tracing, and then where they're pulling that from. So we use credit bureau data, which means that it's updated. It has so many more data points because anything that would potentially go on a credit report is going to get reported back. So even if something like if you go and lease a car or you go and rent a house or you go and apply for a credit card, and all those times you're putting your phone number down and you're just thinking like that person's getting, whoever you're applying for the credit card is getting your phone number. No, your phone number is going out and that phone number is attached to an address, attached to your name. And so the amount of data points you want to be pulling from is as high as possible, and how often that can get updated. So that's the most important thing when you look at data. Just like with property records, right? Like you don't want to pull property records that they last updated ownership 3 years ago. It's a similar thing with skip tracing. So we like typically won't use skip tracing that's over 6 months old. If we pulled it 6 months ago, we're definitely going to be pulling it again to use it again if it's been greater than 6 months, because enough numbers have changed to make it worth it.
Imagine having a complete toolkit for success right at your fingertips. That's exactly what you get with Only Land Fan School, our premium online community. For a low monthly fee, access our treasure trove of resources, the on-market deals course, acquisitions tool suite, and Dispo Secrets library. Plus, connect with fellow flippers in our active community. Whether you're hunting for deals or closing sales, Only Land Fan School has you covered with step-by-step guidance and insider knowledge. Ready to supercharge your land flipping journey? Join Only Land Fan School at olfschool.com today. Got it. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, listen, I have a raw list, I just need the highest possible quality skip tracing, is there a service that you can recommend or something like that where they can go?
Yeah, so I would say there's two that you're going to get credit bureau data at. So the first is called Easy Button Skip Tracing. It's a little bit more expensive. It is the best out there for trusts and LLCs by far. We've tested it pretty extensively. So that is a good, especially if you don't have a ton of data. And if you're maybe like you're just doing some hyper focused cold calling yourself on a couple of neighborhoods you really like or something, that would be a good option. And then if you're really just getting into it and you're going to be doing tens of thousands of records or whatnot, Versium is a good second choice. Versium, you have to have a subscription. I don't know what their current plans are. It does start high. Obviously, we use both and we buy a lot in bulk. So we have pretty significant discounts at Landcaller. But Versium and Easy Button Skip Trace would be the only two skip tracing companies I would recommend.
Excellent. In your professional opinion, what is a good price for data for skip tracing?
Yeah, if you're buying it in bulk enough, a couple cents is going to be what you should expect. If you're talking about thousands of records and not hundreds of thousands of records, somewhere in the 5 to 9 cents range is pretty good, which you can get. I don't remember the last time I checked like the kind of retail price of like Easy Button Skip Trace, but I'm pretty sure they're in that range. So a lot of people see, oh, I could get, I don't want to name the companies, but you can probably name some of the other companies out there. I can get this for 5 or 6 cents and this one's 7. But if you think about it, you're saving like $70 maybe if you're doing 10,000 records. Like that $70, what if 5% of those numbers are more accurate? And we see that it's actually more like 15 to 18% of the numbers being more accurate. But what if it was just 5 and you're doing tens of thousands of records a month? Even if that's just one more deal a month, you're talking about a lot of profit loss because you want to save $70 on cheaper skip tracing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you know if Easy Button Skip Tracing, do they also pull emails?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to
Yeah.
know. Cool. Awesome. So you talked about skip tracing, and then you also started talking about DNC and TCPA. I know that those, like people that are in the marketing world, especially when it comes to phones, like those are some very familiar acronyms. But for people who maybe are just listening to this and they've never heard of these terms before, can you give us a little bit more background? What is DNC? What is TCPA, and how do all of those pieces fit together?
Awesome. So let's preface this with I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. However, I don't think it's a stretch to say that I know more about these topics than anybody in the land community that I've met. We've got an attorney that I speak to regularly on these issues that is specific to these issues. And we obviously have our ear to the ground on them because it affects our livelihood and it affects all of our hundreds of clients. So the TCPA, Telephone Consumer Protection Act, came out in the 90s, I believe, and it was initially just governed phone calls for marketing purposes, telemarketing, right? It has since been expanded to govern things like texting, RVMs, essentially any type of phone telemarketing communication you're doing with somebody is governed by the TCPA, and it gets added to, and Congress adjusts it, and the FCC, Federal Communications, they set the regulatory atmosphere around the TCPA rulemaking and that sort of thing. So one of the things in the TCPA is do not call lists. Everybody basically, if it's a residential number, not a business number, but if it's a residential number, you have the option to submit your number to the DNC and be placed on a do not call list for telemarketing. If you are called and you're on the do not call list for telemarketing purposes, then there's pretty hefty fines. It starts at 2,500 per call that is in violation. So if you call somebody 10 times in violation, you're talking $25,000.
Wow.
The important part there, though, is so there's kind of two schools of thought on the DNC. Some people are going to be super conservative and say, I'm only going to call people who are not on the DNC. And that's fine. That that is definitely the safest way to do it. However, you're going to lose about anywhere from 40 to 70% of your numbers in any given area are likely on the DNC. Because here's the thing, once a number's on the DNC, it has to be requested to take it off. So even if it's not your number anymore, but somebody who owns your number 20 years ago put on the DNC, it's still there. And the carriers, they just reassign those numbers, right? Like you get a number that somebody else had 5 years ago. If it was on the DNC, it stays on there unless the person who owns the number asks to have it taken off. And who goes through the rigmarole of asking for their number to be taken off so they can get telemarketing calls? Nobody.
Right.
So the list
Right.
just keeps building. But there's an important caveat that has come about because of case law. And there's been quite a number of really clear cut court cases that have established that when you call somebody for informational purposes, or if you call somebody to make an offer to purchase something, you are not telemarketing. The definition of telemarketing, as defined by these myriad of court cases, is selling a service or selling a product. And so if you're calling somebody with the intent of, I'm not selling you anything, I'm interested in purchasing your land, lots of court cases have said, okay, that's not telemarketing. Therefore, there are certain parts of the TCPA that the provisions do not apply to. One of those is the DNC. So you are, by law, by court precedent these cases go back over the last decade or plus 2 decades, you can call if your sole purpose is to make offers to purchase. This gets a little weird. Like we have clients who are realtors and they're land flippers, and I always tell them, make sure those two companies are very separate. And the company I'm doing that we're calling on behalf of Land Caller is your land flipping company and not your realtor company, because as a realtor, you are selling a service. So that is
Yeah.
a big thing that people get really confused about. It says do not call. Can I still call? Now, there's some things we still have to do. We have to maintain an internal do not call list. And you do too. If you are doing this in-house, you have to maintain an internal do not call list for anybody that when you call them says, don't call me, that you put them on, and they have to stay on there for as long as you operate. and you have to be able to show proof of that. So that's an example of kind of the compliance. You still, there's a lots of things that do apply, and there's some things that don't, even if you're making calls with offers to purchase.
Yeah, that's really good. I know that there are some people that I've spoken to that you just hear they hear the letters DNC and they completely freak out because they've heard of someone being sued because they've either someone from their team or maybe a cold calling service that they hired that is calling on their behalf actually called a number from the DNC list. I've also heard of people that where there's a will, there's a way, and there are people out there that literally their hustle is going after people that violate the DNC laws. So, can you talk a little bit about some of those cases that you've seen people break the DNC laws and how that's transpired for them? Hey, land fans! Looking for your tribe of serious land investors? Join thousands of your fellow land lovers in the Only Land Fans Facebook group. We're talking real deals, expert strategies, and game-changing connections you won't find anywhere else. This isn't just another real estate group, this is the community where land investors come to level up. Join us at onlylandfansgroup.com and join the conversation today. That's onlylandfansgroup.com. See you there.
Yeah. So you're absolutely, first of all, you're absolutely right. There's a whole cottage industry around of lawyers and serial litigators who, I mean, there's Facebook groups with thousands of people in them where I think they have courses. They teach them how to try to get some money out of somebody from a TCPA, right?
Crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Go flip some land. Go do some courses to flip some land instead of trying to get these people. It's so wild. Okay, anyway.
It really comes down to you see these cases, and it's always one of two things. Either somebody is knowingly taking the risk of doing something that the TCPA clearly says is not legal and they're not in compliance. And they're like, in the off chance, that chance is getting higher all the time. But in the off chance that somebody sues me, oh, I lose a little bit, but I got all these other deals. Be able to be. There's some interesting cases that have come out that are probably dissuading people, or if people knew about them, I should say, they would probably be dissuaded from doing that. For instance, there was a case this past fall that got decided, I think, at a federal circuit court level or appeals court level, that owners of companies are personally liable for TCPA demands. So if you called so many people and they put together a class action, they found all these people and you called them all, and or friends spoke and they got together a class action and they bankrupted your company, they will also come after all your own personal assets and your assets in other companies. So bankruptcy of the company that called is not it's not defense anymore. So there's the people that just take the risk, and then there's the people that just don't know better. If somebody had sued me in my first few months of cold calling myself and I was just literally dialing from my phone number, yeah, I just would have been like, what's the TCPA? What are you talking about? So there's just people that don't know better, or there's people that like know enough to make them dangerous. They're like, I could do this. And they don't really, like I said, treat it like a real company, a real job, and be like, okay, I need to do this right. And they find themselves in trouble. Luckily, I wouldn't say it's complicated. It takes a while to make sure you understand all the nuance and understand what you do and don't have to. So I guess in a way it's complicated, but it certainly can be figured out. I'm a dumb crane eating Marine. If I can figure it out, somebody else can as well. But I definitely don't recommend anybody either outsource unless you know the company you're going to use is going to be compliant, or bring it in-house until you understand what you need to do to be compliant. I will say, I'll caveat all that with like cold calling is the safest, okay, for a couple of reasons. First of all, RVMs are basically completely illegal, and they will be with the new regulation. Not illegal, but yeah, illegal in the way that people use them with the new regulations that are supposed to go into effect on the 27th. We'll see if it happens with some of the executive orders that got signed yesterday, but we're still expecting them to go into effect. And because they are sent by an automatic system and it's a pre-recorded voice, they will now require one-to-one consent, even though they're making an offer to purchase. That means you have to have consent with the person you're asking. So RVM off the table. Texting and cold calling, you can be compliant even with the new one-to-one consent rules. You don't need one-to-one consent as long as you're not using an automatic dialing system on telephone ATDS, automatic telephone dialing system. But SMS sees much higher litigation rates than cold calling because the evidence is right there and it just stays there. Right. We all get calls every day or every week, and it just ends up being just like some red number that shows up down the list and then goes away after a month. But the texts just stay there. And if somebody doesn't delete it, but they just read it, don't reply, like whatever. And then a year from now or 6 months from now, all of a sudden they run into one of those Facebook groups or somebody's, oh, yeah, I heard about my cousin Bobby got $10,000 because somebody texted him and he wasn't allowed to. You should look your number up, see if you're on the DNC. And they go back to, oh, yeah, I did get all these texts. I wonder if there's any suits against any of these companies. And it's all right there for them to see. Same with an RVM. Whereas a cold call, it's just a number, it's a missed call and most people don't bother to call back to find out who was calling. So it is safer in that regards.
Yeah, those are really good points. Now, you mentioned dialers, and that's another big topic that a lot of people are talking about, especially if they're thinking about trying to start up cold calling in their own companies. What is a dialer? For those that are listening, they're like, "What is this?" My dialer is I dial on my phone. Like, so
Well, yeah.
can
So
you
if
talk
that's your
about
dialer,
that?
so yeah, that was my first dialer too. It was by cell phone and me punching numbers in that I individually skip trace. But a dialer, there's software out there that allows you to upload lists of numbers and essentially dial faster. So you're not having to punch in the number by hand or even on a keyboard. You can upload a list. Now, prior to a big case called Facebook versus, I don't remember who was Facebook versus, but anyways, big Supreme Court case that I believe was decided. Prior to that, essentially anything that did anything like automatic was considered an automatic telephone dialing system. So even if it just like automatically queued your numbers for you and you were still dialing them up, the Supreme Court saw through that kind of regulatory BS and said, okay, no, per the law, it actually is if a system has the capacity to automatically generate numbers in a sequential order. And so you just have to be careful because a lot of the dialers out there still do have that capacity because other industries other than ours do use that type of like mass robocall. The politicians use it because they have special exemptions. So it could still be in your system. And in some cases, you could be, even though you're not using it, you have the capacity. You either have to be like, have very clear protocols and evidence showing like how you never did use it, or it's better to just have a dialer that doesn't have that capacity at all. So if you have a dialer that where you just upload a list and it's only going to dial the numbers that are in your list, and it'll do it fast, right? You could have multiple lines going out at the same time and you could be calling three numbers at the same time. First one picks up, the other two drop, and you're talking to that person. That's called a power dialer. But as long as you're not automatically generating the next number in line, it's not an ATD. And so you're not in violation of the TCPA. Auto,
Okay.
yeah.
So is this when people talk about this as a click per dial, is that what is that what they're typically talking about where in order to dial whether it's one number or like you mentioned a number of different lines, you have to click, so there's a click per dial, or is that what you're talking about, or is it?
Yeah, that is again, there's in all this stuff, right? Again, I'm not a lawyer, but the way my lawyer talks about it is like there's a clear, or our lawyer should say, our company lawyer. So there's a clear line of what is unlawful. And then there's like shades of gray and shades of safety below that. And the click to dial is a pre-Facebook v. US thing primarily because that case pretty clearly said, okay, um, if even if it's automatically queuing the numbers and you're not clicking them, as long as you uploaded those numbers and you told it to call those numbers only, essentially is what you're doing when you upload a list, it's not an ATDS. Now, there are some states, and this is the thing, there are some states that have their own TCPA equivalent. Florida is one of them that has a more loose definition that is still working its way through the courts, which could potentially make that an ATDS, and you would have to click a button on the screen each time you wanted it to dial a new number. So there's some variations there with a couple of state laws.
Got it. Got it. So if someone's listening to this, they're brand new to the idea of cold calling and they're like, how much time can that actually save? How many numbers am I actually calling if I'm not dialing, right? Which I think is a good question. Can you give us some context? How many dials are you seeing per lead that you're getting in these campaigns? I know it's probably very market specific, but on average, what are you
Yeah.
seeing?
So here's the thing about dials per lead as a metric, okay, and dials in general. There is such a massive, a huge variation based on quite a few variables, and the results can vary widely. The biggest one is like the healthiness of the list. Obviously, we've already talked about the quality of the skip tracing, the number of numbers, how many numbers you're dialing from, okay, the area codes of the numbers you're dialing from as they relate to the list, the how frequently those numbers have been cleaned and registered, which is its own thing, so that they don't show up on somebody's handset as suspected spam. So there's a ton of variables. What we try to focus on is connections, because dials could be all over the place. A healthy list with plenty of numbers that are registered, we register all our numbers and clean them weekly, but that you might only need to dial 2 or 3 thousand times a day to hit your connect rates that you want to. If it's been a list that you've been calling for a month and you're pretty well worked it over and there's not a whole lot left in that list to pick off the bone, you might be dialing 9 or 10,000 times to get the same number of connects. But the connects you're shooting for is somewhere around 200 to 2 to 300 connects per day. And that means like you're picking up the phone and talking to somebody in an 8 hour day is what our callers shoot for. In terms of leads, again, lead flow is based heavily off of market selection, size of the list, and health of the list. So it's going to be heaviest the first time you call it, as all that low hanging fruit gets picked first. But in general, if you have a list of say 10,000 records, you should expect around 70 qualified leads over the course of a month of calling.
Excellent. And can you give us a little bit more insight into what's your definition of qualified leads?
Yeah, the definition we use at Land Caller with our clients is a qualified lead. First, they is somebody who has answered all of the questions on that particular client's script, because all of our scripts are customized to the client's needs. So if they've answered all those questions and then they've said, yes, I would like a follow-up call to discuss an offer, that's the first step in making them a lead. We do a second screening process where all of our leads go through a quality assurance team before they get sent to a client who reviews that lead. And they're essentially just doing sanity checks. Is this person being sarcastic? Are they out to lunch on what they're telling? If the question was in there, like how much you open to get for your property, and they're throwing some ridiculous number out there, then they're clearly not being serious. Are they giving answers that are shows that they're like obviously joking or not taking it seriously? And then those get filtered out, and that's typically anywhere from 5 to 15% of the leads that, where somebody's, because the callers are trained to not give up on a call, even if they can pick up on the sarcasm just as well as a QA person that can, but they're trained because sometimes that caller starts off sarcastic and by the end they're like, oh, this person's serious, maybe I would want to sell to them. So they're trained to keep going and get past those impasses and keep working the lead. But we do have that second screening process of people that are not being serious or out to lunch with their valuations.
Excellent. So you mentioned the metric of about if you have a list of about 10,000 records, you should have about 70 qualified leads. Are there any other metrics that you find that are very important when it comes to evaluating the success of a cold call campaign?
We have a number of KPIs that we track, and it's if you the thing about cold calling is you're for anybody that's like a math nerd or statistics nerd and about the law of large numbers, right? This is very much what you're dealing with when you're dealing with cold calling. You're talking about tens of thousands of dials, tens of thousands of records. And so you can't the most important thing is to not actually get bent out of shape about single KPIs or like single days or even a couple days of bad KPIs. Because the law of large numbers states like you're going to have these outliers. So you look for trends. Okay. So that's the first thing. It's like your KPIs are trends. They're not points, data points. You're just like picking out. And I would have to go, I know some of them off the top of my head, but frankly, my quality assurance team knows far more because we've got people that basically all they do is every day is just look at all the numbers. But so some of the things we track though are your calls to connect ratio. So how many dials are you making before you make that connection? Your contact percentage. So your contact percentage is actually all the dials that you're making, and then how many times the dial gets picked up versus a connection rate is how many times you actually talking to somebody because you get a lot of pick up, immediately hang up, and that's not counted as a connection. So a good contact percentage is you want to be definitely above 4%. Ideally, you're somewhere in the 5 to 6, 7% range. And you'll see that higher and it'll start to fade off as the campaign goes along. Leads per connect is a good ratio to have as well, because it tells you, and again, all these things tell a story, and it's as you gain experience with it, if you do this in house, you'll start to see these trends of, okay, I know when that starts to go down like that and that starts to flatline, I know this list is running dry. And that's really what it's about. It's about extracting as much value you can from a list, which you've spent money on, you pulled it, you skip traced it, you want to get as much value out of it without like spinning your wheels, because you could keep calling that list forever and generate one lead a day or one lead every other day. And it's really not worth your caller's time. So it's about recognizing when the trends are about to drop off the cliff before they drop off the cliff.
If you're enjoying this episode of the Only Land Fans podcast, please let us know by subscribing and leaving a review. Now let's get back to the action. That's really good. So, as a land investor yourself, what is your approach to hitting or hitting a county or hitting a list multiple times? So let's say you want to hit X county, you go through the entire county that hits all of your criteria for your particular buy box. When do you revisit that? Do you revisit that? What are some best practices in terms of calling a list again?
Yeah, great question. So if we're just talking calling and we're not talking like a faceted marketing approach where we're going to layer on texting or direct mail, or whatever, to that same area, just calling, which my company now, since I launched Landcaller, I've only called. So the last two years have just been cold calling for me. So I've executed this. And like I said, I only work North Carolina. For me, and I think the best results is 6 months of rest. That's 6 months of rest, and it's literally a brand new list. You've never called it before, just brand new leads. Same, it's crazy. So I have essentially 6 lists that I run through 6 months, and then I run through them again 6 months later for the year. 4 months though is the minimum. I tell people, like, at 4 months, you probably have like a 90% solution on your list. Like 90% of you're going to get a 90% of a brand new area for those numbers that you've called.
That's really good. So, in addition to letting that list rest, what are some other best practices that land investors can do to make the most out of a cold call campaign or when they're using cold calling as their main marketing channel?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I tell people is follow up is so important. With every other lead gen method, your goal is to get them on the phone talking, right? Like very few people, even when I ran some really great direct mail blind offer campaigns, like I never ever did a deal where I didn't end up getting on the phone with somebody at some point. So that's the whole goal, is we get them to the phone. Even a texting campaigns, like to get them on the line. Whereas cold calling, we're jumping right past that and we got them on the phone. So you are at the front of the line now with that particular buyer. And even if the price point doesn't quite get to where you make sense for both of you, or their pain points aren't, quite high enough for them to let go, just the fact that you have now had a conversation, or maybe two, or maybe three, with this person, and you have developed some rapport with them, some things about them, about the property, about the history, you make yourself likable. That's a powerful thing, to now that you could just pick up the phone and call them again and be like, hey, remember, it's Joe from New Life Lands. We talked last month, and like, oh yeah, how you doing? How's your family? How are the cows? Whatever I chose to talk to them about. And I land deals every single month that My acquisitions manager put an offer in months ago, and we have a very regimented follow-up regime. And so if you're just one and doneing your leads, like, didn't work out, like I couldn't get them at 50% of market value, but like 3 months from now you could get them at 60%, like you're leaving a lot of meat on the table. And follow up, and I prefer follow up with phone calls, if it's especially if it's particularly juicy, right? 6-figure deals and those sorts of things. Don't send them a text. Like, you want to be the voice on the phone that they like. I've had multiple deals that people have done with me. They're like, I got offered more from somebody else, but I just want to sell to you because I like you. And that's negotiating power right there.
Yeah, that's the beauty of calls, is that you can make that type of connection and rapport with those sellers for sure. So if someone is interested in starting a follow-up campaign, maybe they're used to doing the one and done, but now they're hearing this and they say, okay, Joe, you've convinced me, follow-up is important. Where would you suggest that they start? Because I know that so many people have seen multi-channel marketing where they're sending texts and emails or mail pieces, and it can get incredibly complex. So where would you suggest someone just starting out to have a consistent follow-up process? Maybe it's them and a VA, or maybe they have a couple of VAs. What would be some rules of thumb that you could offer them in the way of starting a consistent follow-up program?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you don't want to take so much on at one time that you overwhelm yourself and then you just don't accomplish anything. So the first thing is, start now, if you're not already, in assigning some sort of code to your leads, every lead. In terms of, we just have it as like a 1 to 10 scale that essentially factors like how good a lead it is, and then also, so you get points for it being like a big potential payoff, or in an area we know we can sell it really fast, right? There's some of these things are a little bit like a little bit subjective, but once you start to know your areas, when that's a property I would really like, or it's got a nice feature on it. And then the other aspect of that is like, how motivated were they? Or maybe they weren't super motivated, but they were willing to negotiate. They came down 50 grand off like what they initially talked about. We just couldn't quite get there. And prioritize your leads, all the leads that don't work out, on a monthly basis. And if you do that as you're looking at that lead, it gets a lot easier, because if you're trying to go back and do that for 500 leads you had in the past, that's tough. I would encourage you, if you have the time, to go work through that, or at least see if you could pick out the best ones. But if you just get into the habit of spending that extra 2 or 3 minutes, or having your VA, of just assigning some sort of metric, a color code, whatever works for you, of, this is a lead I would really like, I want to come back to this person, I think there's something there, whether it's a pain point that you can solve their problem, willingness to negotiate, just a really good deal, it would make a perfect subdivide, like whatever it is about that lead that you really want that. And then start small. Maybe you just take like your 10 best leads from the month, and you say, and in the next month, I like to do it, minimum 3 weeks, maximum 5 weeks of, I'm going to give them a call back. And basically my acquisitions manager, and me too sometimes, because I like to get on the phones too, and especially if it's a big juicy deal, or I have some big development plans with it, then I take lead. But we carve out time weekly where it's just, hey, this is follow-up time. And we just go down we have our list of, okay, these are the people that we last made contact 3 to 5 weeks ago. This is the priorities of the leads we most liked from that time. And we just carve out time each week where it's just follow-up time, and then leaving notes on that leads file. And then we still think that there's a possibility there, then they get put onto the list to be followed up in 3 to 5 more weeks. So
That's great. That's really good. We just talked about the power of follow-up. You work with many clients in the land space. Of those clients who are most successful, what would you say are the key activities that they take with your warm leads that they're getting from these cold call campaigns that make these campaigns so massively successful? We just talked about follow-up as being one of those big ones. But what else are they doing? What are some best practices that your most successful clients are doing with these cold call leads? Hey, land fans, tired of sellers ghosting faster than your ex? Get ready. Our friend Ajay Sharma has created the ultimate program to transform your acquisition game. Land Closers Academy brings you weekly call reviews, a powerhouse community, and the proven system for turning leads into signed contracts. And check this out. Sign up now at olfclosers.com and you'll get my personal call review template that's crushing it with both my team and my coaching clients. This is the exact system we use to level up acquisition managers and consistently grow their closing skills. It's a game changer for managing your team. Ready to close more deals? Head to olfclosers.com and let's get you crushing it. Because the only thing getting ghosted should be your old closing rate.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I were to paint a picture of the people that I think cold calling works best for, is it would be somebody who goes after a little bit larger, higher priced properties, or maybe larger properties, because cold calling actually works best for a little bit more of a sophisticated seller, sophisticated owner, because these are people that are not really answering what they view as junk mail. They're not answering random texts they get at 6 p.m. in the evening when they're sitting down for dinner. And sometimes they're very hard to get on the phone. But man, once you got them on the phone, if you're good and you're a gregarious person, you're a good talker, like you can make deals with these people. And so it actually plays to your benefit if you can talk. So that's the first thing, is you don't have to be a great negotiator, good talker, but somebody on your team probably should be, if you're going to make cold calling like central to your lead generation strategy. If you're like the super analytical type and okay, the odd phone call here or there to finalize a direct mail deal is okay, but I don't like negotiating on the phone, I don't think cold calling is going to be the best fit for you. Now, if you're like, I really want cold calling to be a fit, just hire somebody that's good on the phones. But gregarious people that are relationship based are going to be the most successful in this business, because that's who you're talking to. You're talking to somebody who is clearly relationship enough based in their personality to spend 5-10 minutes of time on a cold call talking to a complete stranger about their property. So that is going to be a key aspect of it. And then I think just like a willingness, and I don't know that this is not specific to cold calling. This is just what I see broadly in the land industry. And we've had hundreds of clients. I've talked to literally hundreds of land investors every year. What I see is like people, the most successful people are the ones that are showing willingness to like get creative with deals, get creative with how they're approaching things. Like I'll just use one example, right? So let's look at wetlands, right? Everybody's scared of wetlands. Some people just filter out wetlands altogether, not realizing that that means that they're often filtering out a property that only has 5% wetlands on it that could still be built. Here's the other things, like stay up to date on what's going on. Sackett v. whoever, the United States Supreme Court ruled 2 years ago that wetlands have to be directly connected to navigable water. Okay, so when people go on a wetlands map right now, the estimates are like 60 to 65% of the national wetlands mapping is what shows the wetlands is actually not regulated wetlands anymore by federal law.
Wow.
Ever since. And the EPA changed the definition with accordance to the Clean Water Act. So like I've got a 40-acre development deal I'm doing right now where the entire thing says it's wetlands. None of it's wetlands. Okay. I'm buying this at 5,500 an acre as is, with a little bit of tree clearing and just like getting it some access. It's probably 30,000 an acre. If I chop it up, it's like a 50,000-60,000 an acre lot. Nobody's bought it. Nobody's looked at it because the entire property said it was wetlands. I've already spoken to Army Corps of Engineers. It's not wetlands. There's no water. There's no navigable water. But people just look at a wetlands map and that's wetlands. So I definitely see the creative types, the types that are pushing the boundaries of the industry as seeing the most success. But that's not specific to cold calling.
Yeah, that's really good. So that brings me to my next question. That was a great nugget that you just shared about the wetlands. But what are some things that, in your opinion, not many people or not enough people are talking about in the land space that we should be talking about right now?
So wetlands is on my soapbox. Definitely start looking into that. The other is for those that want to get into subdividing. I don't hear enough people talking about seller financing. And this is another place where cold calling shines because it's hard to explain. You could explain seller financing in a piece of mail, but are they actually going to read your long description of seller financing? But we like to sell with seller financing. Like lots that's been preached for years in the land community. But man, buying with seller financing is a freaking cheat code. Like that same 40 acres that I'm buying at 55 an acre, I'm only putting 75K down on because I'm financing the rest for 5 years at 4% interest.
Wow.
And there's clauses I put in my seller financing documents that allow me to subdivide, allow me to sell off parcels and reduce my principal and reduce my monthly payments by making essentially additional principal payments every time. So I can subdivide that, sell off a parcel, take that money and reduce my principal on the rest of it. Now I'm lowering my monthly payment. I've still got more of these to sell. And I'm doing that at 4% interest, particularly for subdivides, but even for straight flips, buying with seller financing needs to become something that people get more familiar with if they want to, especially get past that capital hurdle early to like mid tier in their game where you see some success with the small stuff and you're getting bigger and you're starting to roll cash from deals back into the business. But then I want to make that next step and get that. I want to buy that $150,000 property and sell it for 300. And they're like, I don't have 150,000 cash, but they got 75,000 cash. Make seller get familiar with seller financing and get familiar with the benefits it presents to the seller, and then becoming a good negotiator and start buying with seller financing. I've doing deals where I'm buying with seller financing, subdividing, selling with seller financing, and like almost none of my capital's in these deals at all, and I'm paying a little bit of interest in the middle.
Yeah, I love that. Can you give us a quick overview of how you position a seller finance play when you're speaking to a seller that you're going to pitch seller financing on the buy side?
On the buy side. So the big thing is get familiar when you before you go pitch, get familiar with their acquisitions and the state's capital gains tax, the federal capital gains tax. So you should be able to figure out an idea of what they're probably going to be paying in capital, even if they're in the lowest tax tier. But then you could also just do things like, and I did in this case, I just looked up their mailing address and was like, oh, that's a $3,000 home in Boca Raton. Like they're definitely in a high tax bracket. And then so if you could, the more information you could gather about the person, this is just negotiating in general, right? Like the more information you have, they don't know you have, that you can use in your negotiations is power. That's power in negotiation. So know them, try to figure out where they're going to be because the tax thing is super powerful, right? Like we know, or some of us know, if you've done seller financing on the sell side, you don't have to take all those tax hits year one. That's if it's undeveloped, unimproved, vacant land, there's that tax code exemption. So that's a great selling point for a seller. Hey, it seems so you bought this 20 years ago for 50,000. Man, that's my grandpa sold some property he had for 30 years and his tax hit was huge. But that was a house. Did you actually know that vacant land, if we did a seller finance deal where we basically split this out over 5 years, you could lower that tax hit and take it over those 5 years. And that might drop you into a lower tax bracket or at least give you the time to come up with the money. Have you thought about that? The addition of seller financing to lower your tax rate? So that's a great avenue to approach. Obviously, the interest, depending on what you're trying to get there, I always calculate out this is how much I'm paying you. This is how much you're also making in interest, right? Here's, you know, you're actually going to be getting an extra 20,000 a year. I like to keep my monthly payments low to give me flexibility. So I usually amortize over 30, even on sales or even on buy side. So I like to show them like, hey, I'm paying all this. This is almost all interest. I talked to them about the amortization schedule. So I'm going to be paying you 1,500 a month every month for the next 5 years. And then I'm going to have a balloon payment of this much. And all that you made is practically interest. So you're just letting this work for you. And here's the thing, you have a deed of trust. If I default, you just take that back and just go sell that property again. Essentially, Kendall, just go listen to any of your talks or Seth's talks or anybody that is talking to people and teaching them why they should sell or finance sell, and just use those same arguments on the buy side. And you're going to find people that didn't know anything about seller financing that are stoked to do it for you.
Yeah, those are some really good points. And I agree. I do think that the more creative you can be, the more opportunities you're going to be able to create for yourself. So I think that's really fantastic. Let me ask you, in thinking about marketing in the land space, I think the gold standard is still mail. People talk about direct mail all the time. If someone is on the fence and they're like, I don't know if I should be doing direct mail, I don't know if I should be doing cold calling, what would you say to that person?
So I do think the hottest leads, it's not even really debatable, come from a really good blind offer direct mail campaign. There's not a hotter lead out there than that. The problem is A, the space is more saturated, and then B, people have gotten really good at really good direct play. Like our buddy JT Olmsted that we were talking about. There's probably not anybody better than him mailing Georgia and Arizona. Like he has that in his mind. He's like a software engineer. He's got it down to the most science of sciences. So if you're new, realize that's who you're going up against. You're going up against people that have now honed their craft over a decade plus, right? In some cases, and mail is getting ever more expensive. So while it is very good, it's also easy to get discouraged or to go pretty deep into the hole with initial expenditures before you see that return while you're fine tuning your letter and finding the market. I suggest that people start with something either texting or cold calling. Obviously, I'm a little biased. I would say cold calling because it does a couple of things. It gets you in at a lower price point. It's far more versatile and agile in terms of switching from market to market. If you're just getting started, your ability to actually pick a really great market is probably not that high. Maybe you're either a phenom or you've done it in wholesaling or houses or something. So you can pick a great market, but more than likely, you're probably going to have a few strikeouts there with your market selection. So the ability to quickly transition from market to market if it's not working, obviously you could cycle that faster with cold calling. And then the other thing is like cold calling just gets you reps at negotiations. And any successful investor, no matter how good they are at market selection, how good they are with mailers, in the end, like the most successful are always the good negotiators. So the reps that you get from talking to 70 leads a month, even if you only end up turning a couple of those into deals, is just going to supercharge your education about dealing with sellers. And that in turn is going to inform how you approach letters and everything else if you do want to get into mailing in the future.
Yeah, totally agree. I love the speed of cold calling, the response. You can test a market pretty quickly. And then, like you said, the reps. I think that's so valuable. You mentioned cost earlier. Can you talk a little bit about what are you seeing? Again, I know that this is probably very market specific, but national average, what would you say is the cost per deal that you're seeing in marketing spend for cold calling? Calling all ambitious land flippers. Ready to transform your business with proven systems and processes? Imagine this. One of my students recently closed 2 land deals and got another under contract in just 24 hours. That's the power of a well-oiled land flipping machine. My exclusive coaching program is specifically designed for action takers just like you. We'll build out your entire operation from lead gen to dispo, implementing these systems on real deals from day one. But hurry, I'm only accepting 3 new students until 2025. If you've done deals, have a growth mindset, and are ready to scale, visit kindlecall.com now. Let's turn your land business into a consistent profit powerhouse.
Yeah. So our enterprise clients average, so all in, buying the data, skip tracing, litigator scrub, calling, it's like somewhere around 3,300, 3,400 a month for that complete service and that's 12,000 records called over the course of that month. Multiple times, obviously, we're dialing each of those records dozens of times until we get them to pick up. So talking about 3,400 or so a month. And our average client is typically putting anywhere from 5 to 10% of those 70 leads under contract each month. So you're talking about 2 to 7 deals per month. If you divide that on the low end, divide that in half, you're looking at somewhere 15, 1,700 a lead, but that could be as high as, what is that, 400 a deal. Sorry, not a lead, but it could be as low as 300 or 400 a deal if you're at the kind of the higher end of that average. Some people are way above that. We're doing a land call or community call this Friday, and doing a client feature. Actually, I'll throw you the link if you want to throw it out to your people. They're welcome to join. But Chris Johnson, I don't know if you know him. He's a great dude down from Mississippi. He did 50 deals just with land caller calls last year. So we're going to feature him on Friday. And I haven't talked to Chris in 6 months. So I'm actually excited. I really want to know like what system he's got up to see that kind of success. But yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool indeed. And so you mentioned earlier that you find that cold calling works particularly well with more sophisticated owners and maybe bigger deals, whether it's higher value or bigger in size. Can you give us some context about like a little bit more detail around what do you mean by bigger deals? What's the price point that you see them working really well in, or the size range?
I think really the size comes back to price point because it's like a price per acre thing. So really, I think when you start getting above 50 to 75,000, you start to see owners that have a little bit better idea of what their property is actually worth and therefore a little bit more sophisticated. Don't get me wrong, we have plenty of clients that are flipping desert squares or infill lots at in the 10 to 30K price point, but there's also a lot of people mailing those. And we've already discussed like mails a hotter lead, and a less sophisticated seller in general is ultimately doing a mail lead typically. So it's more where like cold calling is breaking away from the deals that are getting chewed up by direct mailers. And I typically see that start in like the 50 to $75,000 range and then really take hold once you go over six figures. Like because you're also now in a range where some of the common things that are thrown out there about you got to get it used to be like when I started, like you got to get it 25 cents on the dollar, 30% of market value. Like obviously those days are long gone for 90% of deals. But you still hear people that say, don't buy if it's less than 50. That makes sense if you're buying for 20K and you've got closing costs, everything else. But if I'm buying for 150,000 and I can sell it for 250,000, do I really care about the percentage, or do I care that I'm about to make six figures on a 3 month flip? And so it gives you a lot more negotiating room once you go over that threshold.
Definitely. Could not agree more, especially those thin deals. One little thing goes wrong and blows up the entire deal. Where I know some people on this call that they made some errors, but because the profit margin was so large that they were okay with being able to lose 20, 30 grand and still come out 70K. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Love that. Joe, what would you consider to be your superpower?
I guess I'm not afraid to just try things, like just do it. It's like people in the Marine Corps are like, man, you're crazy. We're working 12-hour days. We're deployed. Like, why, how are you starting like a land flipping business? I don't know. I'm just going to do it. And I approach some land deals that way as I've grown in my land business. It's okay. I don't know how to subdivide. This looks like this would be a good subdivide. I know that the price per lot, if I do subdivide this, is going to make this a really nice profit margin. Let's just do it. Like I'll figure out how to subdivide as I do this. I'm very probably from my Marine Corps days, I'm very decisive and action oriented in business. And so I think that's paid dividends in an age when a lot of my competition, because there is so much information overload, feel the need or the requirement to listen to just one more podcast, read just one more book, read one more blog article before they take the rep. It's not just take the rep, just go do it. And then if you mess something up, like then you can go read about it, but you've probably already learned your lesson and you'll do it better next time.
Yeah, so good. So good. If you could go back and tell yourself three pieces of advice when you first started your entrepreneurial journey, what would they be?
If we went back to houses, I would have started flipping land in 2018 because holy cow. Oh man. I'd
Lesson
be
one, don't do
lesson
houses.
one.
Go to
Yeah.
land.
Just start with land. I think so. Three things I would tell myself, that is definitely the one. I think two is like don't lose sight of why you're doing it. That from time to time I get a little too involved and lose sight of okay, I got out of the Marine Corps because I didn't like that I deployed 3 times in my last 4 years and I was gone from my kids all the time. So let's not be gone from my kids all the time now that I'm a small business owner. So I got to remind myself that from time to time. And then I think it's not as much an issue anymore. Early on, like I would get pretty down on myself about mistakes I made. But I think if I could tell myself, like, hey, just like the quicker you move past that mistake, the quicker you are moving on to your next success. So it's not to say don't take the time to do some third person removed analytics of what you did wrong, but don't just dwell on woe is me, how I messed up. Like move on, learn from it, attack the next problem.
Love that. I love that. What's your biggest goal or passion you like to go after in your life?
I really, all my entrepreneurial efforts currently have me behind a computer and a desk every day. I really don't like that. So my goal is to build my businesses to be more or less passive and to be outside working on my farm. We just got 15 head of cattle. We're going to start a local grass-fed beef cattle operation here on our property. And if I could just be outside, like chopping wood and moving cows and driving the tractor around every day, like that would be awesome. Helping teaching my kids how to run the farm. So build my businesses to a point where they more or less operate without me and then get outside.
I love that. You are living the dream, my friend. I'm telling you. That's been on my bucket list to have a farm like for the forever. So, tip in my hat to you. That's incredible. You are living the dream. So, I just want to thank you so much, Joe. This has been absolutely incredible. You've given us so much value. How can we give back to you right now? What types of connections or resources are you currently looking for?
Honestly, just if you think you want to try cold calling, I would encourage you guys to give us a try at least first to figure out whether or not you like leads. And then if we have lots of awesome former clients, I bear no ill will, that started with us, realized this is great. I actually don't mind managing people and I'll learn all the compliance and I'll learn the intricacies of a dialer system and I'm going to take us in house and like they're killing it. Actually was never with us, but I helped him stand up his cold calling team, Justin Pichet, good buddy of
Yeah.
mine. Justin, when the texting thing went down, he came to me and was like, hey, how do I do this? And I guided him on how to get his cold calling started in house and he's absolutely killing it. But I would say if you're pretty new to it or you're really good at negotiating or something, like don't take that on until you've tried it out. And I would just say, give us a try. We're the first land calling, cold calling company built for land. There was another company that did some land, but they were primarily single family home before we came along. And we're the only one that I know of that where I am like I use my own product. It's the only product I use. It's all the leads for my business, and I'm still in land literally on the day to day. I'm there in the trenches with you and happy to help you if you need it.
Excellent. I love it. And if someone's interested in reaching out to you or interested in learning more about Land Caller, where can they go?
Yeah, our website's real simple, landcaller.com. There's a lot of information there. You can book a call on there, send an email. My personal email is joe.roberts@landcaller.com. So if you want to shoot me an email directly, feel free to do that as well.
Wonderful. And we'll put all of those links and email addresses in the show notes. Thank you so much, Joe. This has been absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Joe. This has been an absolute treat. Thank you so much for sharing so much information. Thank you for your service. Your story is incredibly inspiring, and it's just been really incredible to listen to you and learn from you today. So thank you for sharing. And also thank you everyone for joining us and asking so many fantastic questions. This has been an absolute blast. So we'll catch you in the next one. Until then, take care, be safe. Catch you next time. Bye bye. If you're interested in hearing from other seven-figure land flippers about how they've started and run their businesses, then join us at onlylandfans.com. Looking forward to seeing you there.